Our next speaker is Alexander Moltzau, the author of a fascinating blog, 500 Days of Artificial Intelligence, founder of Young Sustainable Impact, currently working at KPMG, researching artificial intelligence and new business development. He also runs AI Social Research Network and is very interested and passionate about impact, social change, and climate change.
Thank you very much, Marta. It's really a pleasure to be here and to be invited to SeedStar's and Shinhan Financial Group's session. So I'll just start my presentation straight away. My name is Alex, and I currently work in KPMG IDAS, which is the section for International Development Advisory Services. And it's a small part of it that we like to call the Innovation Unit in Norway. And I'm pursuing a Master's of Social Data Science at the University of Copenhagen, where I am part of the inaugural cohort. So that means it is the first time that this education is ever taking place in Copenhagen. But what the attempt is to combine insight from social data science with these other insights from computational science or data science. So the topic for today that I was asked to talk about is how data and AI will shape the post-pandemic future. And when I was asked to talk about this, I thought it would be good to think about the future in terms of the current picture that we have of AI at the moment, especially pertaining to the things that I have been looking at. So try to give you a bit of an insight into what I have been looking at and maybe what can be gleaned for that. Some large questions and some more practical ones. Marta mentioned that I am doing a project called 500 Days of Artificial Intelligence. Day one was June the 3rd in 2019, where I decided to challenge myself to write about the topic of artificial intelligence for the next 500 days. And the way that this has been going is kind of, I started to split it into these subtopics. So the first 50 days, I wrote more generally about AI concepts and this kind of general definitions. And the next 50 days, I wrote about AI safety and climate concerns. So, and the next stint was about AI and international relations. So I became increasingly interested in how artificial intelligence work on this world stage. And then further, there was this huge kind of proliferation of national strategies within artificial intelligence. So I read probably most of the national AI strategies in the world that have come out. And later during the next 100 days, I started to map out AI strategies. So also looking into these multilateral AI strategies, the indices, relationships. But from that kind of theoretical level, I thought it would be nice also to see not only kind of what is happening in these policy discussions, but also what is happening within AI hardware. Because I think talking about it in the abstract form is certainly interesting, but focusing down as well on what is actually happening in the really kind of, you know, in the foundational research of AI hardware and where that will take us. How is that changing now? And I think that is also a lot about the future because AI is kind of discussed today as well in relation to social inequalities. And one recent example that we saw of this was that, for example, in the US, where sort of this facial recognition in policing systems were kind of halted in a way by some of the largest technology providers that kind of started with IBM, and then Amazon followed, and so on and so forth. And more recently, we've seen this kind of question about the acquisition of TikTok. So who has influence, which country are we talking about? And kind of moving into questions of digital sovereignty and of different nations that influence companies. Because if you are a startup or if you are a large company, it is relatively inevitable that these discussions will influence you to some extent. And since also I'm working more NLP based in work with the United Nations, I decided to kind of round off these 500 days to look more practically and pragmatically at natural language processing. That also is a large part of artificial intelligence. And at the same time, I think it's really important to recognize in the present that a lot of the applications of AI are very nascent, and that we have to be kind of skeptical when we see an application from a new company. So I think, we have to be equally kind of enthusiastic, but also kind of skeptical, because for a lot of the companies that work with AI, they are kind of sometimes a bit optimistic in terms of the actual impact of the product, and also kind of skewed in terms of their interpretation of results or of what the actual product or service will do on the ground within a given country. So for the national strategies, I thought it would be worth to talk a little bit about where they have been. The national AI strategies have been sort of really kind of a phenomenon the last decade. And the countries that you see here marked in green, they have national AI strategies. So the question is as well, how good is a strategy, but also how is it used? But I think it is important to recognize, if you're working as an AI company, that there are nation states and they have specific things to say about how artificial intelligence will work. So these are kind of have recently, most of them have been recently developed, and it was a huge priority in the European Union to have this cooperation on artificial intelligence. What this means is that if we think about the post-pandemic future as hopefully a time in a decade, perhaps, or in 5 years, where there will be the beginning of a vaccine, or that the vaccine is starting to become rolled out, these kind of strategies or intentions are still relevant. So it is important to think about what these countries say, and also that the strategies will change depending on what kind of governance that you will find that is also shifting within each government. One example is the US strategy that is kind of heavily slanted towards the defense at the moment. But when the Obama administration was responsible, it had much more integrated kind of climate concerns and sustainability and so on and so forth. But I think personally, I think the strategies that integrate these concerns will be the ones that do the best. China has done better to that extent, but I think the French one is probably the strongest one in this regard, but also the Portuguese one that kind of includes these notions of biodiversity. But you can clearly see that in the different countries, strategies are kind of made according to national priorities. So, for example, the Norwegian strategy is very maritime focused. So this can kind of be used, and the AI papers are increasing. There's a huge increase in AI papers, but also in particular from the Asian region and specifically China. So, but what I think is important to think about as well is the collaboration, which is very strong in these different areas, especially China and the US. When it comes to the European perspective, there's also this kind of large extent of government focus on this in Europe. So if you think about Europe and you think about AI, you should also really carefully consider the government's role in that, and that they actually play quite a big role in these type of projects. And the AI patent picture has also been changing a lot, and I think it will continue to, but I think that the East Asia and Pacific in particular, but also the Europe and Central Asia may increase over the coming decades. How does the picture look today? There is an AI index score. I would be skeptical of this as well, but it is the case that US is currently doing quite well, and that there are a lot of countries that are maybe does not have the same kind of capabilities. And I mean, it's interesting to sort of like try to look and see what are people measured on, like what are these different countries, how are the different AI indices that are popping up, measuring different countries. Within the Nordic countries, for example, Finland is really good, while Norway is not doing that great. One important thing that I saw like during this time that I looked at all these different questions related to AI. So in the post-pandemic future, there are shifting computational needs. So what I would say about that is that non-volatile memory, as in the kind of storage of information, is important, but there will be an increased importance in these more computing-heavy facilities, like the collaboration between OpenAI and Microsoft. But also in the post-pandemic future and in the years ahead, there seems to be kind of a shock of unemployment, hunger, deficits, poverty, inequality, combined with increasing natural disasters. So invest your time to address these issues. That is my kind of main concern here, that this is kind of actually where we have to put our money, is to address these type of issues together. And I think startups are some of the most important actors in making that happen, because thinking new is not easy, but there are some fantastic people in different companies that actually address these issues. There are also larger questions in terms of peaceful coexistence, with advanced AI in warfare seeming more and more likely, but also the deployment of broader AI. And I'm not saying broad AI as in some of this Terminator style or this really advanced artificial general intelligence, but we have to ask what AI is optimized for. Is it optimized to address these kind of solutions that I previously mentioned? Or is it kind of forgotten in this kind of picture of urgency of crisis that we are seeing? Because my argument is that we need to be making artificial intelligence work for our shared ecology. And that means optimizing for some different goals, and it also means being aware of what I would call more responsible digital value chains. So these supply chains, right, of artificial intelligence and machine learning. As I mentioned, this shifting infrastructure and the requirements, but also the increased compute that is occurring. So what I would realize in that context is that AI can do a lot in terms of our cities, our components, our recycling, utilities, energy. But we have to be aware that every single imprint that is digital has a physical consequence in terms of satellite projects. And I would mention the Elon Musk project as well, and also that of Jeff Bezos, that are both intending to do enormously large satellite projects in the coming year. And also the cable projects of the undersea cables that are currently being built, like the one that is being built partly by Facebook, the one called To Africa, that will triple the network capacity of Africa. And also that every single digital appliance, whether it is for consumer use or within larger companies, require minerals. So mining is not likely to decrease. And what does that say about how AI will work for our shared ecology? All things that we need to be aware of, combined with this kind of digital nationalism, or this increased focus on protectionism of the digital and the safety and security. So let's make it work for our home, because we share this planet together, and artificial intelligence in a post-pandemic future and the use of data is in the end our responsibility as a form of governance. So global focus is not any less important. It is more important than ever, and it's important to think about the peace and to think about sustainability in a very broad context, to think about collaboration. And to do that, we need startups, and we need to invest in the right things, because we live in this beautiful planet, and to create solutions for a post-pandemic future includes really integrating climate concerns into these advanced technologies. At least that's what I had to say for now, and I'm very much open for questions, and I really look forward to discussing with the other participants.
Thank you, Alex.